Okay, so growing up, what inspired you to pursue art?
So my dad was an artist, and so he got me started making art just in engaging with me and drawing with me when I was a kid. Um, and from there, that was really encouraging for me to explore and pursue my own artistic practice. I was really fortunate to have some excellent art teachers growing up that encouraged me to continue drawing and taking photographs. And so that's what I focus on in my work now.
And your series that you submitted, the Life in Quarantine,
Yes.
I'm sure COVID-19 inspired it, but what really inspired you to create art on quarantine?
I mean, it's obviously something that all of us are living through and going through as this really interesting shared experience situation. And so I really wanted to explore these feelings of loneliness, of isolation in an interesting way that I was kind of hearing reflected in conversations with other people, other friends around my age. So.
And I noticed that the color palette of in your photos is very cool and very blue. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, that's just to help contribute to that tone of melancholy. Yes.
That's super cool.
Thank you.
Have you always done photography, or do you have other mediums that you work with?
No, I actually started off in illustration with drawing. I delved into painting a little bit more when I got to college, and I got to take a couple of painting courses. I didn't get into photography until I started working at the Daily Cougar, which is the student-run newspaper at the University of Houston. And I was assigned to take some photos for a project, and I had never used a digital camera before, so it was very much a sink or swim type of situation, but it really allowed me to learn a lot about photography. And from there, I just started to delve into that interest and explore that interest. And now I take photos regularly, and I've taken a few classes, and I find it to be a really interesting and edifying practice.
And what process of, what is your artistic process?
Okay, yeah, great question. So I just start off with an idea. I usually get a lot of ideas from how I'm feeling and current events that are going on in the world around me. From there, I usually just produce some thumbnail sketches just to flesh out how I want the piece to visually look. From there, I'll do some test shots or some test sketches. And then from there, I'll move on to creating kind of a final piece before I move into revision, where I'll tweak the pieces that I've made so far, either retake some photos or redraw part of a piece before completing the.
Sorry. We lost that end. It cut out just a little bit. What was that last part you were saying?
Yeah, so I just revise the piece that I've made, either retake a few shots or redraw part of an illustration before I finalize the work and work toward putting it in my portfolio on my website.
Wow, that's a very intense process. How did that come about?
It came about from taking art classes in high school. I had the opportunity to study with a really excellent teacher, and she really instilled in me this idea of process of working through and really thinking through your ideas from start to finish.
And I'm curious, what is your favorite part of the process?
Ooh, I would say my favorite part of the process is the initial brainstorming portion where I get to flesh it all out on paper and see just kind of part that I really enjoy is the tweaking, the revision, because I get to see all of the pieces of the project come together, which is really nice.
And in this series that you submitted, those are self-portraits, right? Do you usually work with a model, or do you usually photograph yourself?
I have traditionally worked with inanimate objects and nature a lot in my photography. So this was definitely something new that I hadn't explored that I was interested in delving into. It was definitely a little bit more challenging to stage the shots when you're acting as both photographer and model, but it was a really interesting and very fulfilling experience for me.
And, what's something that you learned about photographing, a living being such as yourself?
I think I learned a lot about how to capture movement in a photograph, even when someone is sitting still, which is, I think, the thing that really allows the series to come to life, is that even though they are still self-portraits, that it still conveys a sense of moving through the course of a day, moving through this life in quarantine.
So, on quarantine and COVID-19, how has COVID-19 really affected your work and, your studies?
Oh boy. Um, it has been an interesting, unprecedented time, as I'm sure it has been for a lot of people. I will say that it's definitely crept into my work a bit, my artistic and academic work. In my artistic work, it's definitely given me a little bit more time in that I'm not having to commute anymore. So I have a little bit more time to dedicate toward my um, artistic practice, which is nice. It's also given me different content to consider, different thoughts, different feelings. So that's been really interesting to explore.
And, excuse me, sorry.
Oh, so I understand that that your major is in creative writing and that your minor is in art. Do those two majors, do they influence each other for you?
Yes, so I chose that combination specifically because I am a cartoonist. I make comics. That is where my illustrative strengths lie. So I chose the combination of those two so that I have the component of writing and the component of art in my degree plan.
Very cool. And I'm sure that that benefits you in the school paper as well.
Yes, it definitely allows me to create some interesting coverage that um, provides an interesting perspective on news stories, which is the section that I work in.
And what's something that has been that you've struggled with and something that you've overcome throughout your career?
I think the biggest one is probably self-doubt, overcoming a sense of wondering whether the art that I'm making is quote unquote good enough. But eventually I came to a place of peace where I realized that I just have to keep trying, keep creating, and see where it goes.
Yeah, and as an artist and creative writer, how do you define your success?
I think that success just entails continuing to create. Um, I don't think that I really have considered any awards or any shows or anything as a marker of success. And I mean, those have come along the way, but it's just the process of getting to learn and create that I see as the definition of continuing success.
And are there any artists or musicians that have inspired the work that you do?
Yeah, so one cartoonist that has particularly been influential to my work is Kate Leith. She is a cartoonist who has done comics like Edward Scissorhands, and that has definitely been a nice influence on my work. And then in terms of photography, the work of Gregory Crewdson has been influential to my work in terms of trying to capture a cinematic quality to my photographs. Even though I don't have the ability to work with the large scale sets that he's able to, I still try to capture a similar quality.
And what do you think are the most important ideas or concepts that you put into your work?
In my photography, I really focused on trying to capture an emotion or an idea. So for Portrait of a Life in Quarantine, which is my latest series, I really focused on capturing the idea of loneliness or isolation that has accompanied quarantine during the coronavirus pandemic. And then for my cartooning practice, the things that I find to be the most influential are other books that I'm reading or what I'm studying academically.
Yeah, and I'm kind of interested on your writing aspect because we've seen your series. But what do you tend to write, or what is writing like for you?
I tend to write literary fiction that's more skewed toward horror or that includes horror elements. That's just what's interested me the most. My mother uh, raised me on a steady diet of Stephen King novels and stories, so
Yeah.
that's definitely worked its way in there. Um, in terms of writing practice, I try to write for a few hours every week. I wear a lot of hats and balance a lot of things, but I still try to make sure that I have time for my writing.
And what's something that you wish you had known when you were a junior or a senior in high school?
That you don't need to go to art school to be a good artist. I applied, it was all good, but it was just exorbitantly expensive, and I worried that that would be prohibitive in some way, but I just kept exploring and making art, and I feel like that's the most important thing.
And if you weren't a creative writer, would you go into the arts?
Yeah, I think I would still be involved in the arts.
Yeah, and so where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, or where would you like to be?
I would like to be a practicing cartoonist. Wherever location that may be, I'm not sure, but I know that it's something I can do wherever my travels may take me.
Yeah, that's so cool. And if you have your work on a website, or if you have your work anywhere, you should send that to us and we can link it. We can link
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how does your personal experiences, how do they bleed into your work?
Oh, I think that some of the characters that I write and draw are definitely based on the people that I interact with every day. I live with 3 roommates and 3 cats, so that definitely makes for some interesting shenanigans that have definitely made their way into my work.
And how has your work grown over the years that you've been practicing?
Yeah, so with illustration, I really started off with um, single page comics, things that really didn't extend past maybe 4 to 6 panels. But then after I continued exploring the medium and took some classes and workshops specifically for cartooning, I learned how to expand into making zines and mini comics. And so that's something that I've definitely grown to explore in my illustrative practice.
And do you do any prior research before starting a project or a piece?
Yes, I do. So since I focused a lot on drawing people, I definitely do some research on different poses and the way that the light would fall in certain situations, just to ensure that I have that accuracy and that quality of reality in my illustrations. For photographs, I do a similar activity of research in which I do research on photographers that I know have a similar style or have focused on a similar idea, just to see what information I can glean from other artists.
And how do you balance university life and working on your art and creative writing? How do you balance?
Doing my best. That's how I balance it. It can be a lot. I balance a full course load with a couple of jobs, internship, fellowship, in addition to my artistic practice, because I really want to just learn a lot of things. My practice is very interdisciplinary in that way. I just try to allocate appropriate time to all of my tasks and to ensure that not only do I take care of all of my work, but I also make sure to take time for myself so that I have time to recharge and to continue doing all of the things that I love to do.
Excuse me.
I remember you saying that you have a website, and what was that process like for you creating that?
It was very it was a very interesting experience. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to best showcase my work, how to best showcase my talents and my skill set in a digital format that would be easily accessible to anyone who wanted to know more about me or about my work.
Yeah, and that online profile, has that benefited you as an artist?
I will say it's definitely benefited me as an artist because it allows people who are interested in my work to um, see it outside of a show setting.
And what would you say makes your work unique?
I would say that my work is unique in that it's very influenced by my own personal experiences in my life. So as unique as my life is, that is how unique my work turns out to be.
And do you hand draw your comics, or is it an online program, or?
So I do a mix of both. Oftentimes I will sketch out a drawing on a sheet of paper just because I find that it's more natural for me to use a non-digital platform for sketching. And then I will either scan it in or take a photograph of it and do the inks or the colors on my iPad's drawing program because I feel that it gives it a cleaner finish.
Yeah, and as an artist and writer, how have you found your opportunities?
A lot of them through social media or on the internet, a lot of shows and other submission platforms advertise through platforms like Instagram and Facebook. And so a lot of the time I'll see them on there, or friends and family that know that I make art will send those opportunities to me.
And, you know, what do you define as like a successful comic? Like most comics have a storyline, and so how would you proceed with that?
I would say that a successful comic is one that just tells the story that they're trying to tell effectively through a combination of words and illustrations, whatever that story may be. And then I think that success outside of the writer is just having one person read it and really enjoy it.
Yeah, and what pieces or even comics are you particularly proud of?
I made I'm working on a zine right now called Side Effects May Include that just explores the different kind of side effects of quarantine again and how that is impacting people's mental and physical health. And so I think that that is a piece that I'm particularly proud of in that it is relevant and it really captures my experience as well as the experience of the people around me.
Can you share with us some advice that has been really helpful or impactful to you?
I think that the best artistic advice I received is from my high school art teacher, which is just to go for it and to be bold. One of the most impactful experiences of my artistic career is that we were working with just a huge black crayon to draw a silhouette. And after I, handed mine in, she just held it up in front of the class and said, this is what it means to be bold. And I mean, it was just solid black and, not the best, but
Oh, no.
Welcome back.
Oh, you cut out a little bit again. Can you
Yeah.
repeat the very, very end?
The end of what you're saying. Yes, repeat that.
yeah, just to drop my ambitions and to go for it and to be bold in the rest of my artistic practice.
Yeah, and so being bold, what is that? What has that meant to you as an artist? Because to my understanding, being bold can mean very many things. It can mean controversial or other words that aren't coming to my brain. But what does it mean to you?
I think that it just means having the freedom to express myself and my thoughts and my ideas clearly on the page without holding back. That doesn't mean not editing or not revising my work, but it just means being honest and open with the things that I want to portray.
And what has it been like for you as an artist, taking critiques and implementing them?
It's been a very positive experience overall. A lot of the
From cell time. So very angry.
Can you?
Did we cut out a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
yes. That, so
When we stared
almost
blankly.
almost your whole answer to that did not come to us.
That's
So
all right.
say that again.
All right. So a lot of the critiques that I've received over my artistic career have been extremely helpful. A lot of it has been very helpful in shaping not only my artistic practice, but how I present my art. So.
And what is one of the most impactful critiques that you've had?
I would say that one of the most impactful critiques that I've had is in my photography class from this past, that I just completed this summer. And it was just to curate your work and to really streamline your ideas. And I'm definitely a big picture thinker, and I want to incorporate all of the things sometimes. And it was good to have someone remind me that sometimes it's good to rein it in a little bit. So.
And how do you go about giving critique?
Yeah, so I really try to focus on what is there in the work and how that correlates to the idea that the artist is expressing in their statement. And from there, I just try to provide feedback based on how the work articulates that statement visually.
Yeah, and before we wrap things up, so having read not a lot of comics, but a good amount of comics, how would you describe your style? Because I feel like every artist has such a different style when it comes to comics.
Yeah, so my style is very much clean lines, a lot of brush pen work to create a kind of fluidity. I primarily work in black and white so that the emotions and the messages behind the illustrations really take center stage, rather than being just, I don't want to say detracted from by color, but distracted by color a little bit. And I try to work with unconventional panel structure, which essentially means that I don't just use square panels. I try to vary the shape and even work without panels at all. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and then finally wrapping things up, what is your art and writing? What has that meant to you?
Oh boy, it's been basically my whole life. It really does shape kind of my day to day. It is what drives me. It really is the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great interviewing you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We really enjoyed getting your perspective. It was very interesting.
Well, thank you for having me today.